What's going on, guys? Andrew of New Bar Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 72. Now, what I think this episode managed to really hit the nail on very well with were a lot of subtle details about the show. As the show's been moving on, for instance, in terms of duels, we've gotten to the point where we're seeing, say, 3, 4, 5, 6 link summons within one turn. If we go back to the first, handful of 15 episodes or so, they would spend massive amounts of time each duel just showing us the link summoning animation. You know, the first couple times, there was a lot of drama, suspense, excitement to see this new type of summoning come into a show like Yu-Gi-Oh! And to watch it unravel and to see what they had in mind artistically for it, which was great. It was great those first couple times. But as we're building towards these duels where it's like, within 3 turns, you've had 18 monsters link summoned or something crazy like that. You don't want to see that over and over again. I think in this episode, we're really starting to reach a good rhythm for that. For example, in Bowman's turn, he link summoned, I believe it was 4 different times. You got to figure you had the 3 Hydrodrives and then the Hydrodrive Trident. With all that being said, he went through that relatively quickly, yet we still got the emphasis of, oh, he's link summoning a lot. And now it's more towards the focus of the actions going on, the relevance of the duel, rather than just, hey, we've got this new mechanic we really want to sell you on. So that's one of the subtle details I think they really hit the nail on the head with. They had a couple moments within this episode where they actually cut the backing track to emphasize the supposed drama of the situation at hand. For instance, there was a building that was about to collapse on Playmaker, a real high stakes scenario for him. Should something happen to him in Link Vrains that's of really high danger, we're very much under the impression that that would affect him in real life as well. At that moment, while we were unsure what was going to happen to Playmaker, although let's face it, he's got that kind of main protagonist shielding about him, we basically knew for sure he was going to be safe. They cut the soundtrack nonetheless, which I think served the purpose really well. Music as a whole always adds to things as long as it's done correctly, and by that I also mean the lack thereof. When done correctly, can have just as much of an impact as using the right music in the right spot. Sometimes the right music is none at all. Adding to that, I think they've done some really nice stuff with the lighting here, with the flames and everything else, keeping that very consistent, just to emphasize how intense things are right now between Bowman and I especially. That's one thing that was a very dramatic tone shift here for me, is generally speaking, it's kind of always been I's the companion and Yusaku's along there with him. Here in this episode, I felt like that was very much starting to level out, which in my eyes is a good thing because I think it shows development in the relationship between I and Playmaker. Throughout all of Season 1 and up till most of this point in Season 2, it seems to have been a very Playmaker-dominated relationship. He would make most to, or basically all of the decisions within duels. I would basically just serve to be moral support, crack some jokes, those types of things, mock the enemy a little bit. He was our comic relief character who would add to the plot sometimes for the most part. But now, we actually see him make a decision in this duel. We get to connect to him some. I mean, as he's watching this fake Cyber's world collapse around him, we're given the idea of why he's so frustrated to begin with. We're able to feel right along with him. I mean, we see the flashback of when Bowman took on the shaping of this giant yellow creature and was letting flames just consume all Cyber's world and attacking small Cyber's creatures like Link Karibo, who's adorable and innocent and playful from what we've seen and how he interacts with I or she. I'm not sure which one, not that it necessarily matters. Regardless, to the point at hand, it doesn't matter, I should say. But still, it makes I a much more relatable character. It makes him feel like a more significant character, and it builds on a relationship that I feel had been very lackluster up to this point, especially considering Yu-Gi-Oh! Has held up a pretty strong standard for that kind of spirit partner to partner relationship in the past. I mean, Yugi and Yami Yugi was generally pretty darn well handled, especially for the most part, at least in my opinion. I can see where some people may have some complaints that Yugi didn't do a whole lot sometimes, but he did serve to balance out the Pharaoh in terms of a lot of morals at first, kind of balance out that darker side. And as the show developed, it came to be very much kind of a co-reliance between the two. Then if we move on to even Wing Karibo and Jaden, while I'm not a big fan of GX on the whole, they handled some neat stuff with that. Wing Karibo kind of interacted with Jaden, was able to show him things, guide him to things, those types of things. I don't think that was the best of the spirit partner relationships. I'll get to that in a second. 5Ds didn't really have one, but Yusei kind of stands on his own from a lot of typical main protagonist patterns in Yu-Gi-Oh! Then we have Zexal, which I personally think was handled the best, in that you had that sort of student-mentor relationship with Astral and Yuma. So anytime that you begin to develop a bit more of that codependence between the characters, or even like Yuya and Yuto, when Yuto was able to kind of balance out Yuma, remind him of how serious the situation at hand was, or remind him of what happened, or remind him of how serious he needs to take the attackers from the fusion dimension. It was very much a balance between the two. Up until now, it's felt like Ai's just kind of there. Now Ai's calling some shots. Ai is kind of being the emotional driving force for us as the audience. It's kind of like, okay, you're showing us all these colors and stuff, but that doesn't mean anything. Oh wait, there's one of our main characters who's really struggling with this because he watched all of his friends, everybody he knew, suffer as a result of this enemy. Yeah, maybe we really shouldn't like him. It kind of draws us further into the plot, and now he's working alongside Playmaker. There was a point in this duel, like I said, where he actually kind of made a decision, in that when Playmaker had Cyber's Magician out, there were 3 different equip spells he had kind of available to him within his hand. Playmaker was only going to use 2 of those, kind of hold on to the other one as maybe an additional resource, maybe to make Bowman not realize everything Yusaku had up his sleeve, so to speak, in terms of tricks. And I instead says, look, this guy's clearly evolved. His dueling skills have been scaling up every time we faced him. We don't know if we're going to get another chance to try and finish him. Let's just try and end this thing quick. Go ahead and play it. And Yusaku, for once, actually seems to trust Ai. Ai has had other attempts in previous episodes to try and convince Playmaker to play one way or another, and Playmaker pretty much just blows him off, or Ai tries to make an assumption about the duel or something like that. Once more, Playmaker more or less just blows him off. Here, he actually listens. And I think that shows that Playmaker's opening up to more to Ai, and I think it may also imply to us that Playmaker may just understand the severity of the situation, in that Bowman was sort of designed to have taken on the strongest aspects of both humans and the Ignises. So in order for the humans and the Ignises to survive Bowman's takeover as a result of Lightning's grand scheme, they kind of have to work together, because Bowman has both their strengths in one. So for them to match that package deal, they've got to join their forces as well. And I think Playmaker may be understanding that. I think it's also that maybe he is developing that soft side for Ai that I think most of us have probably assumed was there all along, even if he didn't express it a whole lot. That brings us to another point, but that Bowman makes when Ai actually calls on making that move. And Ai keeps referring to this voice that he hears within his head sometimes when he's dueling. And Bowman then says, yes, Ai, you have instincts. That's why Lightning was saying you were such a special Ignis. Those can serve to fail you on many times. They cloud your judgment and everything else. But it may just be purely unique to you amongst the Ignises, which I think is really neat. It kind of... We're getting more and more individual development for these Ignises, which I think shows us more and more of what Dr. Kogami was really getting at, and that he was essentially trying to recreate humans without the restrictions of mortality with these Ignises. We've seen that they have motivations. Look at the full spectrum of motivations, from Earth, who's kind of in the middle, to Ai and Flame, who are totally against the conquest of human, to Lightning and Windy, who are like, humans, we don't need them, get rid of them. Then you have the full range of emotions. We've seen Ai be happy, be excited, be angry, be motivating to Playmaker. And in this episode, we saw him weeping for the loss of his friends, which turned to anger and a desire for vengeance. We're seeing the full extent now of what Dr. Kogami really got at, how that could potentially be dangerous, especially considering how dangerous humans often are to themselves, to have humans that say, you had some of the worst people throughout history that suddenly weren't restricted by mortality. Just consider that for a second. Some of the world's, just some of the worst people, or even worst supervillains throughout fictions, anything like that were not restricted by mortality. It means there is theoretically, there's the potential for there to be no limit to their reign of terror. That's one possibility. And then you have those that are going to go off like Lightning, like Windy, and be like, well, we don't need humans at all. So I think the way we're watching this develop, the independence of thought and everything else, in some ways it's fantastic, because it's kind of like, okay, this is cool. They have all the traits that make humans great, but at the same time, the pieces that make us great as people, those independent thinking skills, those emotions that drive us, everything else, those things that add to the experience of our lives that make each of our stories unique and everything else, are also the same things that cause conflict within us, wars, everything else. It's those conflicting beliefs, conflicting experiences. It's the fact that we have that ability to make some independent thought. And I think Dr. Kogami was seeing all of those evils just compiled, throw in the fact that there's immortality and the fact that they wouldn't really need us anymore. And it could be a very, very scary situation in some ways. But at the same time, all the dangers the AIs pose are dangers we face when dealing with other people every day, and I think we just have to remember that there's just as much potential for greatness as there is for terribleness. And I think in that sense, I'm really beginning to develop an underlying appreciation for the show, and I think it is touching on some key themes on what it is to be human to begin with, and that's something I very much like. I feel Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the years has subtly hinted at a few like philosophical themings. For a while, I even had a little short video series going on about like the philosophy of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and I would like to touch upon that again at some point, as if I ever find the time. But I think this show is really getting into that in terms of like what it means to be human, what are the pros and cons of what we deal with every day, and learning to realize that potential for greatness is the part of it that we need to focus on. And that's why Dr. Kogami was kind of this guy who went astray from the more positive path from seeing the potential in things. So moving on from that, guys, we were left in a weird spot with this duel after I went on my whole philosophical tangent. Back to a little bit more of a down-to-earth stuff here. In that, Bowman is perfectly set up to be able to use Storm Access. Now, that being said, it will most likely grant him with a really powerful card. He's been constantly evolving. We've seen the potential Storm Access has had in the past, and that it's bailed most of its users out on several different occasions. But I think we also have an idea of what Playmaker's getting at here. If you stayed through the ending scene to the preview for the next episode, Playmaker uses something called Neo Storm Access. So after having seen some of the episode previews, it kept subtly referring to, I's got this secret plan under his sleeve. I would assume that's it. I had theorized for a while that we do have cards that are coming out in the TCG. We have a Cyber's Quantum Dragon. That's a Synchro monster that fits perfectly with Yusaku's deck archetype. We did recently see Revolver's Synchro Summon with Borreload's Savage Dragon, so there doesn't seem to be any walls holding back from Yusaku being able to suddenly Synchro Summon as well, maybe catch Bowman off guard a little bit. Maybe that is what will end up happening, but it seems like the secret weapon as a whole is going to be this Neo Storm Access thing. I'm wondering if maybe Yusaku suddenly has like choice over some of the cards he gets, because theoretically in the past they were randomly generated, although because he has main protagonist luck, it would pretty much bail him out no matter what the situation was. I'm wondering if maybe suddenly he has choice or something like that. It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds, and if it is indeed the thing that supposedly I has been holding in his back pocket, what exactly allowed him to create this and allows Playmaker to use it, whereas the other Storm Access users don't necessarily seem to be able to do that. Now, I could be totally wrong. For all I know, maybe Bowman uses Neo Storm Access first, and Playmaker's like, wait a second, we can replicate that, and then they go for it. I don't know. Regardless, this does fall in line with typical Yu-Gi-Oh! Theming of watching a character's skills evolve over time. For example, the Zexal transformation between Yuma and Astral kept getting stronger over time as well. So that being the case, the Neo Storm Access thing, I think that's the bigger point at hand here. Perhaps the card he generates from it is still Cyber's Quantum Dragon. We'll have to wait and see there. But it's all unraveling interestingly. If Yusaku is getting a new ability, though, I find it incredibly unlikely at this point he's going to lose this duel. Kind of disappointed by that. I wanted to see him have that character development of struggling with a loss, which I guess it is still possible. Maybe he will at some point, but regardless, it looks like he is set up to win here. Curious to see how Bowman's going to react from that. Maybe it was just a weird translation in the subtitles, but he did say something in episode 71 about the winner gets both him and AI. So what does that imply for things, and how is Lightning going to proceed moving forward if this key piece here seems to be kind of operating on his own thought and deciding, okay, if Playmaker wins, I'm going to tap out. Granted, we don't know we can necessarily trust Bowman, though he does seem to be developed on logic and reasoning, so I feel as if his word is probably accurate, although perhaps it's just a lie to achieve a means to an end. It's all very hard to tell at this point, but as per usual, guys, if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Be sure to let me know all your thoughts, theories, etc. If you didn't enjoy this review, be sure to give me some constructive criticism down below as well, and I'll catch you guys next time on some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains content.